What's going on, everybody? Triple Crown 24 back today, and this is a video I've been wanting to do for quite some time. I thought it would be a fun discussion, so if you have any thoughts that you'd like to weigh in as we go along here in the video, feel free to drop them in the comments down below. We'd love to continue the discussion with all of you. But this is going to be talking about the rise of the parallel card. So looking mostly at baseball, we're going to look at the Topps Gold and the Topps Black parallels. Also going to dive into the Prizm Silver for basketball and football, more so focusing on the former, but a lot of the principles I talk about in context of basketball definitely applies to football and vice versa. I think a lot of these are interchangeable here, so hopefully you will enjoy it. To kind of preface this, what got me thinking about it was the release of 2020 Topps. And thinking about it about a decade ago, flagship Topps used to be something that was ripped because it was a celebration of the new card season. It wasn't necessarily a product, especially Series 1, that a lot of people anticipated in terms of opening up to find a huge card. And by a huge card, that usually meant a big hit. So hits being autographs or relic cards, both manufactured and game used or player worn, whatever term you want to use with it. But that idea has really changed, and a lot of the motivation behind opening Topps Series 1, from what I've gathered so far this year, has been to chase the big rookies. And the most notable ones I would say in this class would have to be Gavin Lux of the Blue Jays, you have Yordan Alvarez of the Astros, and Bo Bichette of the Blue Jays. I think I said Lux was of the Blue Jays. He's actually of the Dodgers. I'll say that before someone corrects me down in the comments, so apologies for that. But there's also a really solid second tier of guys too. You have someone like Kyle Lewis, who had a really great 2019 debut and will now have rookie cards throughout the 2020 product release. There's quite a few top prospects that could see their debuts in 2020. Luis Robert, probably the most anticipated. We'll probably see him later on down the line. But looking in terms of just Series 1, LA's Lux, Toronto's Bichette, and Houston's Alvarez are really the big three that a lot of people are chasing. And kind of coming along with this chase is going to be the chase for the rookie card parallels, so the golds and the blacks. If we turn our attention over to the basketball side, it's the chase of the silver. And there are some colors too that are very much chased after. Some people are a big fan of the Mega Box exclusives, so a pink ice at Walmart and Prizm, for example, a red ice at Target for Prizm, and then you have the Cello Pack exclusive red, white, and blues. Those are also fairly popular. But for the most part, if you ask people what is their parallel of choice, a lot of them will go towards the golds, the blacks, and the silvers. And as I mentioned, some of them do have cult followings, as there are many people who go after the red, white, and blue Prizms because they've been out for a while. Over on the baseball side, the Independence Day parallels, which have been around since 2018, have really picked up a lot of traction. A lot of people really enjoy those. Those have a print run of 76. They're all serial numbered, but for the most part, we go back to those parallels that have really been around for the longest amount of time. So the question is, why are these parallels, the golds, the blacks, and the silvers, so popular, and why is so much wax being opened or perhaps even stashed away as a, whatever you want to call it, maybe an investment opportunity, as something to kind of sit on for a while and flip at a later date? Why is this happening? So I have 4 reasons that I've kind of narrowed it down to, and I think all of these contribute to it to varying extents, and we'll cover all of them. So they are longevity, consistency, availability, and what I would like to call the cult of exclusiveness. So I'm going to get to all of those here in a little bit. But we're going to start off with the first 2 here, which would be longevity and consistency with it. So here's a little table that I put together. I know it looks a little bit Bush League, but you'll have to bear with me here, showing you the origins of some of these parallels. So in 2001, you have the Topps Gold that comes out. It's released in Series 1, commemorates the 50th anniversary of Topps baseball releases, which is incredible. Now, Topps Gold was something that was introduced back prior as well in the 90s, but it was much different. It was a one per pack type of insert where it just had a gold foil, and that's something that continued throughout the 90s. And 2001, it changes its format where now it is serial numbered. Now in 2000 Topps, they introduced the limited edition cards, which were serial numbered to, I believe, 4,000, but I could be wrong on that. Here you have the golds, which are numbered to 2001, so the year of release. And this has now been continued ever since then. So every year it increases by one card. So this year in 2020 Topps, the print run is 2020. A few years later, they added to their parallel run and introduced the Topps Black. And for the longest time, these were the two parallels. It was the golds and it was the blacks. So we see this in 2003. It starts off with a print run of 52 and continues to increase by one each and every year. Now in 2018 and 19, they kind of overlapped. It was a blunder by Topps where both 2018 and 19 both had cards numbered to 67 that were black parallels. They have added 2 in 2020 to make them out of 69. So probably going forward, you will see them increased by 1. Time will tell on that. But they're much more scarce based on that serialization that I just mentioned. But the black parallels have been a mainstay in the flagship release for over 15 years now. And we look over at the basketball side, the Prizm brand is relatively new, and that's kind of come along with the changing in licensing, where Panini has become the sole licensor for pro basketball and pro football. Basketball occurred earlier than football, but Prizm is now kind of treated as the flagship brand. They do have what is essentially a paper product, as a lot of people like to call it, in Donruss, that is kind of somewhat similar to flagship, but it definitely doesn't garner as much attention or hold the same value that a lot of the Prizm releases have in previous years. So the silvers, we don't really know what the print runs on them are. My guess is that it's going to be anywhere in the ballpark of 2,000 to 2,500. There is no stated print runs on Panini cards in terms of pack odds, so it's kind of hard to figure out since these cards are not serialized. But you can see the laundry list of names there that have coincided with these releases. So a lot of key rookie cards really in the 2000s and 2010s all have parallels of these specific card variations here. And a lot of superstar players as well. So for example, the Mike Trout blacks and golds, very popular in baseball. In basketball, the LeBron James silver Prizm goes for pretty good money, as does in football someone along the lines of Tom Brady. So these superstars, really the best in the game for their respective sport, do see quite the rise in it. One of the things that really draws people to it, being the number one thing I discussed earlier and why it's so popular, is the longevity. So they've been around for quite some time, and that kind of ties into the second point as well, which is the consistency with it. So if you look at these, you know pretty much what the print run is going to be each year. The silvers is a little bit tougher to gauge just because we don't know based on there's no serialization and there's no stated print run or pack odds. But it seems to be that the number of silvers out there has remained relatively the same based on how many you get per blaster box or hobby box when opening up Prizm basketball or Prizm football. So the print runs probably have not changed too much. Maybe a few hundred more have been printed, but no more than a 10% difference is what I would say, which is kind of what we've seen with the Topps Golds since their first release. It's been about a 1% increase in print run just because it goes up by 1 each year, whereas the blacks, it also goes up 1 each year. That one you're looking more so at about a 20 to 25% increase overall. So the silvers somewhere in between the two there, but still comparable enough where we can include them into this discussion. And the nice thing about it is that they are there constantly. So while there are so many different parallels out there, none of them have been around as long every single year with the same numbering as we've seen with the Topps Golds, the Topps Blacks, and the Prizm Silvers. And that's kind of an idea that applies to various brands as well. If you take a look at Topps Chrome, for example, and this also ties in back to when we had Topps Chrome football, the blue refractors are one of the most popular refractor colors. And why that is, number one, a lot of people really like blue. They look good overall. It matches a lot of team colors. But the print runs on them are very consistent. Usually it's anywhere from the 99 to 199 range, where those are going to range from. So there's not any drastic changes in print run, where if you take a look at the orange refractor, for example, those used to be the retail hanger pack exclusives that have now been replaced by the pink in Topps Chrome Baseball. And now the oranges are numbered to 25, so they are much more scarce than they were, let's say, back in 2014, before that change was implemented in 2015. So that is one of the big things with it, is that you're not seeing too much change in the print runs, which the consistency is huge among collectors. So I'm going to move on from the table now and kind of move into the availability discussion on this. Now, if you take a look at the blacks, they kind of don't necessarily fall too much into this discussion because they are only available in the hobby format. However, generally speaking, with the exception of some of the products that have key rookies from the past decade, so your 2011, 2013, 2014 update sets are going to be very pricey depending on which one, especially that 2011. But for most part, Series 1 and Series 2 are relatively cheap. You can get a lot of those boxes for about $50 a piece, which is, I would say, affordable for the average collector if they're not ripping too much wax. But for this discussion, we're going to look mostly at the golds and the silvers for at least this portion of it. So the availability with this is you don't have to open up hobby boxes to pull a Prizm Silver or a Topps Gold. In fact, you pretty much get at least one, sometimes even two, in every blaster box that you open. They're actually pretty good odds to pull one in a hanger box for either product, both Prizm and Topps flagship as well. So, and that, I think that is absolutely huge for collectors, especially in the hit-driven culture that emerged in the 2010s, because a lot of it has driven up the prices of hobby boxes. If you take a look at, for example, let's go with football wax for hobby boxes in 2017 with Patrick Mahomes, especially now that he has won a Super Bowl. It is very difficult to find a box of even the lowest tier products for under $400. And that's all for a chance of pulling a rookie that was really highly regarded at the time that he was released. Was he the most popular name? I would say that Deshaun Watson was probably the most popular name back in 2017, from what I remember. That's who a lot of people were chasing. The Texans were usually one of the more expensive teams in group break products. So that is a big part of what has contributed to that wax price, is that you still have those the guys that you can fall back on. But in general, the chase for Mahomes is very difficult in those products because his autographs, they weren't just produced left and right. They are somewhat scarce compared to some of the other players in the set. And there's by no means, I would say, the odds are against you to really pull one of his autographs, even if you were to open an entire case, much less a single hobby box. So chasing the autographs or the relics really has not become viable for a lot of people because they've been priced out of the market. And as I mentioned earlier, a lot of people returning to the hobby as well. If you look at what they used to collect, it's really brought a renewed interest in the rookie card. And one of the beauties of it, as I also mentioned, is that you can pull a silver or a gold from a retail box, which has really risen to the rise of the appeal in retail and why the clear the shelves tendencies we've seen with some of the basketball releases in 2019, 2020 has really taken over the hobby. It's very difficult to find those products on retail shelves just because the possibility of pulling that rookie parallel is definitely alive and well within those products. So the availability, if you're able to locate these products at suggested retail price, which is not easy, but if you are, at $20 a box or so, that is definitely much more affordable than $100 and up for most hobby boxes. for the average collector, those who would be interested in purchasing this product. It's even better for a younger audience that might be using allowance money or some kind of money from a first job to be able to go out and purchase product. So that is another reason for the popularity. And kind of the last one that I'll touch on here is the cult of exclusiveness that I'll mention. So I'm going to pull up a little math that I did here to kind of figure out what your odds are of actually pulling one of these key rookie cards or a star veteran base card in the parallel form. So here are some recent completed sales. We're just going to look at basketball and baseball here of some of the parallel cards along with their base version. Now, I base this off of raw card prices, and some of these numbers might be a bit off just because the sample size is very small. Some of it I had to estimate on because there were actually no recently completed sales. So I kind of had to base it off of the multipliers from previous parallels, especially in the blacks for the baseball, just because there's so few of them out there that they just don't come up for auction all that often, or they're only available at ridiculously high buy it now or best offer asking prices. So taking a look at this, what I came out to is, based on the averages here, roughly about a 15x multiplier from the value of a base card to the gold in baseball or silver in basketball and football equivalent of that card was on average. Now, some players more so, some players less. I've actually saw in baseball that the multiplier is much more drastic. That is just because of the increased pack odds, in my opinion, which I will touch on here in a minute. But if you look at the base to the black, this one only applying to baseball, it's about 125 times is the average multiplier, which is kind of crazy. So you can pause the video there if you want to take a closer look at that table specifically. But I'm going to move on to this one here to look at the odds of pulling a specific gold of a specific rookie card if you were to open up the product. So we're looking at one from the beginning of last decade and one from the end with the Mike Trout and the Acuna. Two of the more popular update rookie cards, in my opinion, from the last decade. Arguably the two most popular, but you can let me know what you think about that down below. If we look at the Trout, these odds are based on hobby boxes. Your odds of actually pulling a gold of any player is 1 in 3 for a hobby box, which is actually really solid, and that is number of packs. So you're going to get about 8 golds per box. If we fast forward to 2018, those odds drop to 1 in 11, meaning that you're going to get 2 golds in your box, and you have an outside chance of getting a third one in theory. Maybe 1 to 2 boxes, if you were to open up an entire case, would have that extra gold. Now, if you look at pulling those specific cards, the checklist is actually a little bit smaller for 2018 update compared to 2011. It's about 10, there's 10% more cards in the 2011 side of things. So the odds of actually pulling a Trout gold, so say that you open up a pack and you fan it out to see the gold border, what is the odds that that particular gold is Mike Trout? We have to multiply that by the pack odds, and assuming that every single gold, which since they all have the print run, this is true, have the same odds of being pulled, you're looking at a 1 in 330 chance of pulling that card. You multiply those odds together since they are dependent on one another, and you come up with just under 1 in 1,000 hobby packs you will pull a Mike Trout gold, which is actually not all that bad when you look at what the Acuna card looks like. So now you have 1 in 11 with a little bit of a smaller checklist, so there's not as many subjects to compete against pulling the specific Acuna card, but because there are fewer golds inserted into packs, well, at least there are more packs that don't have golds out there, the odds of actually finding a gold, much less that specific one, are about 3 times to 4 times as high as was back in 2011. And the odds, they get even steeper when you look at the black parallels. For the Trout, you're looking at 1 in 19,000 packs, and this is for a card numbered to 60. Now keep in mind there are 7 more Acuna cards out there, so about a 10% higher print run of the Acuna black compared to the Trout black. In fact, even a little bit more than 10%. Yet the odds you would actually pull, in theory, 3 Mike Trout updates before you would pull 2 Ronald Acuna Jr. in terms of the black parallel. So it's making these products much more difficult, especially now, to find some of these golds and blacks of the specific player that you're looking for. It's getting harder to even find the golds and the blacks in general. And that's kind of contributed to this last idea that I touch on here that I like to call the cult of exclusiveness. So if you take a look at this little chart right here, pretend that top box where the 1 of 1 line is all the way down to the bottom of the chart is the market for these particular cards. So we look at the first one, that is the base market. So as you can see, the majority of the market based on the print run is going to be looking at the base card. That is what they are able to afford. This is just kind of based off of, say, the average pool of 10,000 or so collectors who would be in the market for a particular gold or base or black rookie card, or in the case of basketball, a silver. And as you can see, as you go up the ladder, those sections become thinner and thinner. Now the platinum one, as you can see up there, if you kind of look at the space for the text, there's a reason that I made it as large as I did for the font, is that the platinum barely fits in there. That's because there's only one 1 of 1. So the odds that that card comes up for auction more than once in a decade is very slim. Usually it's going to result in some kind of major life event that would cause that card to resurface back for auction. Considering how much of this product is produced, the odds of actually that specific card, so say the Trout Platinum or say the Zion Finite, which did appear already in this Prizm release, the odds of pulling that specific card are extremely low. So we look at the parallels that more people would be interested in buying just because they are more readily available for auction. You will see several blacks come up for auction of Yordan Alvarez, Bo Bichette, and Gavin Lux if you haven't already. You will see quite a few more silvers of Ja Morant, Zion Williamson, RJ Barrett, as well as golds of the baseball rookies I mentioned before. And you're going to see so much base that pretty much anyone who wants one can get one. And that's also if you go back to that last table I showed earlier where I was trying to calculate what the average multiplier was. The Tatis base had the highest, or excuse me, the Tatis rookie card had the highest multipliers, but that is because the base card is so cheap. A lot of people can easily obtain a Tatis card, especially, we're looking at raw for that specific table, but if you look at a PSA 10 version compared to some of the ones listed there, such as a Yelich, a Trout, an Acuna, a Soto, the Tatis is actually quite a bit cheaper than a lot of those in a PSA 10, especially as you go on and you look at the different parallels, which is really fascinating considering they are much tougher to pull, those parallels, which don't even hold as much value. So what this kind of all contributes to is that the base cards are not exclusive enough. There is a bigger checklist than there used to be with some of these products. For example, Series 1 is 350 cards, and the update series is actually a little bit less. It used to be 330 for all of the releases. Now Topps has kind of changed it around where it's a 1,000 card even set among Series 1, Series 2, and Update. So the odds have changed a little bit. But because there are fewer golds being inserted and fewer of the different colored parallels, and even if you look at this in the basketball side of things as well, it hasn't changed as much as it has in baseball. But there are more and more base cards being inserted into these packs. More so where the ratio of base cards to parallel cards being inserted means that there are going to be higher chances of pulling a specific base card than there ever have been before, especially as more and more formats are released, such as the hanger packs, the fat packs, where it is actually much easier to pull a specific player just because you can find their base cards more readily available. So that's why you've kind of seen, I would say, some of the decline in some of the base, because they are much more readily available and they are being printed at a rate that really can't meet the demand. But the gold and the black is exclusive enough where there is just enough buyers in the market at different tiers based on how much they are willing to allocate in their monthly budget or whatever they use to measure out how much they're going to spend on cards. There is more room for them to kind of enter the market and compete against one another, where there's really no competition at that lower tier. And things get very competitive once you especially get up into that black tier. There might be fewer buyers available at that point in time, but there are certainly still more buyers than there is supply. So when demand exceeds supply, it's really going to drive up the prices, and that is why the multipliers are so high for those black parallels and why they continue to climb for the golds. So those are kind of the 4 reasons that I came up with on why these parallels have taken off in popularity. You can let me know if I missed anything out in the comments down below. I really appreciate you taking the time to watch today's video. I know it was a lengthy one, but I had a lot to cover. And I will be sure to see you later in the week with probably some more Miggy mail. So until then, have a good one.